Here we go. Do, 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 do. She didn't want to do video.
Hello.
MJ Evans.
Yes.
Hey, Daniel. Hey, Daniel Ott from the Edge television broadcast.
Hi, Daniel. How are you? It's so nice to talk to you.
Well, it's nice to talk to you, Doctor. Man, thank you for coming on our broadcast tonight.
Well, I'm pleased to do it. It's a rare opportunity to get to talk to an audience that you can't see, but's out there, and then hear from some of them who have more questions that they'd like to ask. But anyway, I'm sure you're used to that.
Yeah, sometimes we have our guest on video, and sometimes it's audio. Well, welcome to the program tonight, Doctor. And man, we're going to be talking about a lot about Zecharia Sitchin and his beliefs and maybe some Sumerian history. But before we do, Dr. Evans, why don't you kind of introduce yourself to our audience? How did you get into working with them and looking into it and writing books about them?
Well, it was kind of a serendipitous kind of thing that happened. One day I opened my mail and there was a flyer about a conference. It was going to be scheduled in Washington, D.C., and it had an enticing title. The conference was called When Cosmic Cultures Meet. And I thought, oh my goodness, that reminds me of news reports I had heard about a crash of an alien vehicle in New Mexico. And I thought, oh, I wonder what's going on with this. So I looked at the list of all of the presenters at this conference, and it was quite a prestigious conference. It had some very prestigious people who had been looking into the UFO process, had been looking at people who had reported having been abducted, had looked into ancient culture and sources of information, and all in all, I decided that I was going to go to this conference. I couldn't find anybody else that had that same interest, so I just jumped in the car on the day before the conference was to convene and drove myself to Washington, D.C., and the 15th or 16th person on the agenda of the conference was Zecharia Sitchin. I didn't know anything about this man, and he very succinctly and very adeptly introduced the results of his work of over 30 years. At the time, he had published 6 books, and I was fascinated. Well, he also appeared on the last day of the conference on a 3-person panel that was called Futures. And he again, along with the 2 other people, but he was he was an elderly man. He was in his 70s at the time. And he just very succinctly reiterated what he had said in his first presentation. And it was about how he had come as a biblical scholar to have an understanding that there were people who came down. And through his diligence and curiosity, he realized that they were called the Nefilim, and that word, by the way, has been interpreted as being a negative source, but they were the leader of a culture that had come to this planet from another planet that had a periodic return to our solar system. So every 3,600 years, their planet, much larger than Earth, would come back into our solar system, and then after creating havoc here, because of its magnitude, and it would orbit between Jupiter and Mars. And then it would go on out into deep space and be gone for the remainder of the 3,600 years. There, give or take 100 here and there. Anyway, he got into the fact that they had come into what we now call the Middle East. They splashed down a very small crew 445,000 years ago, and they created some cities. One of them was Ur, another was Eridu. They developed a civilization, and they were here on a mission from their own planet, which was called Nibiru, and their king had launched an environmental research project, which was to get gold that could be pulverized and put into their atmosphere to stop the dissipation of the heat of their planet. So way back in those pre-ancient times, there was an environmental problem that had to be dealt with, and they went to all kinds of lengths to do that. So here is Sitchin, this very circumspect elderly gentleman, talking very authoritatively, not in any kind of bombastic way or anything, about the research that he'd been doing for more than 30 years. And he told that he had started to take small groups of people who wanted to travel to some of these sites. Anyway, I was fascinated. So at the end of the conference, and I was there by myself, essentially, talking with some people here and there, but I went up to the platform and I introduced myself, and I had been traveling to England and Wales, looking at some of the megastone structures in Ireland. I went to an ancient site called Newgrange, which was a very unusual site. Anyway, I asked him if I had been studying the myth of Moytura, which was an ancient Irish myth, and it was about some battles that had been fought way back in the prehistory of that island. And I asked him if those people who had come to Ireland, burned their boats, essentially were viewed by the indigenous people as invaders, if they could possibly have been the Anunnaki that he was talking about. Now, the Anunnaki were the rank and file. The Nefilim were their leaders. They were like the chief scientist, very adept guy who had lots of political savvy, and the king, and some of their other colleagues. And so they were in charge of the work of the Anunnaki. Anyway, Zecharia Sitchin listened to my questions, and then he said, "Have you read my books?" Now, at the outside of the conference room, there was a book vendor, and they had stacks of books, maybe 1.5 feet or so high. There were, lots of books. Well, the 6 of them that he had published already had these, what I called, racy covers. So I just kind of walked past those and over to a table that had more hardbound books that looked more academic. And I told him this, that I bypassed his work because it looked like it was racy sex novels. And he always got a little chuckle out of that.
Anyway, what was it? What was it, Doctor? Was it naked Anunnaki?
Well, they were, technically they were science fiction kinds of things. If you look at his first 6 books, the covers have been redone on most of them as they were republished over and over. But anyway, after talking with him, and his question to me was, or his statement to me was, read my books. So I went back out at the end of that conference session, and from the book vendor, I bought a copy of each one of the ones that were there, and there was one more that I had to search out. Well, Sitchin continued to study and write more books, and his total collection now is 14. Anyway, after reading his books, and I went back to England to a library that essentially served the respite sort of vacations of some of the clergy of the Church of England. And I went to their library, and here were a shelf that went from floor to ceiling, actually. And it was filled with some of the sources that Sitchin had used. So I spent a couple of weeks there, and that really confirmed my academic skepticism that things that Sitchin was writing about were not common. They were not known to the traditional academic community that I was a member of and still am, actually. So that is essentially the root of my interest. Shortly after I came back home and did that homework, Sitchin organized a group that was going to Greece, Santorini, and Crete. So I found the resources out of my own savings to go on this 2-week tour. And there I got to know Sitchin, but I also got to know the people and that group was probably 18, 20, 25, I can't remember for sure. But I talked with these people, and they were from all walks of life. Business, there was an airline pilot, there were other airline employees, there were travel agents, there were business researchers. These were very interesting people. They had an advanced curiosity. They weren't intimidated by the fact that information was coming from ancient sources. They knew how to separate the garbage from the good stuff. They were fascinating people to talk with. And these were the people that were attracted to Sitchin's work. Now, this was back in the middle 90s that this conference was held, that I did my initial work. And to answer your question, this was the process I used to get rid of and recognize that my skepticism, although typical of an academic, had no grounding. Sitchin knew what he was doing. He was adept at finding sources that were obscure. He taught himself to read the ancient languages, Babylonian, Assyrian, ancient Hebrew. The sources that he got into were called Sumerian clay tablets. The Sumerians were a created group of people who came when the gold supply that the Anunnaki were mining and shipping back to their own planet, that they essentially dictated to the created people, the Sumerians, information from their own history. Like a secretary takes dictation and creates a manuscript, that's what the Sumerians were. They did not, even though much of the literature that was out there talked about the Sumerian tablets and the Sumerian civilization and how they started what we would now call civilized cities and civilized processes. Historians, archaeologists, medical people, people who could keep records. And what the Sumerians did was taking the information from this pre-civilization, these people who were not numerous, but had come here and civilized Earth. And I left out a little important piece. While these Anunnaki were doing the gold mining, they got pretty fed up with working in deep, dark mines, so they mutinied, and that caused the chief scientist of the Anunnaki to tell his father, who said, "You're not going to be forgiven your mission to mine gold. You've got to figure out a way." And so his son said, "I've got a way. We can create a being who will be intelligent and also will take information, will take orders, and carry out a mission. So he created a race of people, a group of people, first called Sumerians, and then as they multiplied and did other kinds of jobs. We know these people because we are them. In other words, the Nephilim scientist Enki created beings. It took a long time to get the right genetic combination from a hominid that had been living on Earth, who were hairy, who drank from streams by getting down on their hands and knees and cupping their hand and drinking, who had fire, what we know as primitive man, and also what the scientists did was take some DNA from one of their own beings, and they merged it. So we, human beings that inhabit the globe now, are the results of the genetic research that was done 130,000 years ago by the Nephilim. So once you get into this, it kind of captivates you, at least it did me, and I have met hundreds of people who have read Sitchin's work, who have accepted it, who were fascinated by the scope and depth and quality of his research, who knew him. He was very generous with his time, especially on these tours, and he did lots of tours, some to ancient sites in Central America and Mexico, and also in South America, the areas that were inhabited by the Inca, Lake Titicaca, those kinds of areas. He was an inveterate traveler, even though I never did quite figure out, other than the income from his books, what his sources were. I guess he, just like many people who do academic type things and have curiosities, like the guys who go to Egypt and study the ancient Egyptians.
Dr. Evans, let me ask you something. Did Zecharia Sitchin ever say that he was given information from the Anunnaki themselves?
No.
Okay.
No.
So
he was not a seer. He read the clay tablets. He read the work of the original scientists and archaeologists who deciphered those clay tablets, that cuneiform language. He taught himself to read it.
Okay.
And when he read for himself the publications of these early scientists, and they were working middle 1800s, 1898, 1904, 1906, his bibliographies cite all of these early people who found the tablets, figured out how to read them, published their reports and their books.
Okay, so he
Sitchin used those sources.
Sitchin did not translate their language. He read the translated language. Is that right?
Well, he actually read the original clay tablets. He taught himself, and he traveled to museums and collections where these clay tablets were essentially stored or on display. The early excavations in the Middle East, in what is now Syria and Iraq, called Mesopotamia, those sources that were found by the early museums that sent exploratory missions out. For example, there was one group of scientists and archaeologists who broke into what was a mound. They called them in the Middle East tells, and they were sand-covered ancient ruins. And one of the famous finds was they broke into a city called Nineveh, and they found hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands and thousands, of clay tablets kind of stacked up on shelves, all cataloged with who the translators were that had had originally read them.
Mm-hmm.
What the museums and universities did that found these tablets was they wanted to bring them back to their own institutions, and they felt they owned them because, after all, it was the museums and academic institutions that had paid for those exploratory.
Dr. Evans, let me ask you something. You mentioned Nineveh. Nineveh is mentioned in the Bible. Was there any?
Oh, yes.
Was there any information that was that would corroborate any stories in the Bible from that collection?
The Bible stories were based on the ancient knowledge.
Okay.
On the clay tablet knowledge.
All right. I want to get
the
to
Bible
that.
stories. The
Okay.
Bible stories, yes, they mention in many places in the Old Testament, mostly.
Mm-hmm.
They mention some of these ancient sites
Mm-hmm.
because the Bible was essentially a third generation report,
Mm-hmm.
often woven in with the history that the Bible writers had experienced.
Mm-hmm.
And there were lots of
Well, let me ask you.
individuals
Okay. Well, if you, as far as the third party intervention or the rewriting of the Bible, maybe that mirrors ancient texts, how is it that the Bible seems to have so much transformative power in our laws and in people's personal lives? Why doesn't the cuneiform scripts of the Sumerians have that transformational power?
Well, because there were very few people who could decipher those languages.
Mm-hmm.
There was a scientist by the name of Rawlinson who found a cliff
Mm-hmm.
in Iraq, in what is now Iraq, and it had 3 columns of information, and each one was different. When they were finally deciphered and figured out what the message was, it was in 3 different versions of language.
Doctor, let me ask
the
you.
The very first language that we know about on this planet was the cuneiform language of what is called the Sumerian tablets.
What did Zecharia Sitchin die of?
Well, he was 90 years old when he got sick. I had lunch with him in June, and he passed in October, just beyond his 90th birthday. I'm not exactly sure. It was some form of cancer.
Okay, sorry to hear that. All right. We do have some questions that are coming in for you, Doctor. One of these from. So I've been waiting for an opportunity. So let's do it right now. Steve Ells wants to know if the 12th planet is on a 3,400-year elliptical orbit.
3,600.
Let's go with the 36.
3,600.
Okay, we'll take that correction.
Yep.
3,600-year elliptical orbit. How does it stay warm when it's so far away from the sun?
Well, the planet, by the way, is on its way back. There are reports that are coming out on YouTube and from other scientists that say it's within our solar system now. Uh-oh. We don't know very much about their planet. It is possible it has an inner core of heat like our planet does. Mm-hmm. It is possible that they do not live on the surface. They live underground. We are going to have an opportunity, if the Earth stays enough together that we all aren't annihilated by the tectonic effects that are predicted to come along with the return of that planet. And when it circles around our sun, it will zip around. When an object, a planetary object, gets to a foci like our sun, the gravitational effects increase, and it increases the speed of the rotation or the path of the incoming object. This is what happens with comets.
Mm-hmm.
And
our
science, our cosmologists know an awful lot about velocities and the way in which trajectories.
Okay, all right. We have another question for you, Doctor. Was Sitchin a Mason?
No, he wasn't.
All right.
He was a Jewish scholar. He was a biblical scholar. He was born in Baku on the Caspian Sea, and when he was very young, before school age, his family moved to Palestine, and he was a journalist in Palestine during World War II. And then, of course, when the State of Israel came about in the late 40s, he had already come to New York, and he lived most of his life in New York. But while he was growing up, he went through the typical training and studies that any Hebrew young man, all Hebrews essentially, are trained in the Old Testament. And an interesting thing happened, if we have time for just a little vignette. When he was in school, maybe he was 11, 12, 13 years old, he noticed that the book of Genesis used the word Nephilim, and he realized that the translation as it was given in the Bible in Genesis was giants. And he looked back into the actual translation of the original word, and he found that it meant those who came down. So the questions that just itched into his curiosity and his being was, who were they, where did they come from, what did they do when they came down? And that's what his books are all about.
Okay, and we have this question from our live chat. It says, does Sitchin ever get put into a trance by Edgar Cayce?
No. He knew of Edgar Cayce, but he never, I don't even think he met him. I'm not exactly sure, but I'm almost positive he did not meet Edgar Cayce. Sitchin's work is intellectual and academic. He was not a trance medium. He was not a seer in the way that New Age techniques are now given. He did not meditate. He did feel as his knowledge of these ancient peoples, the Anunnaki, the Nephilim, actually, he did develop a personal affinity for Enki, who was the chief scientist.
Okay, here's
the first one to come to Earth.
All right, here. What was his name?
Enki.
Enki was
E-N-K-I.
He was the first scientist? Okay. All right, what tribe of Israel did Sitchin come from?
I can't tell you that.
Okay.
He was born in, if he died when he was 90 in 2011, he was born in the 1900s.
Okay. All right,
I can't remember.
That's fine. Let's move on.
There's I can't do the arithmetic. It's 8:30 at night.
All right, we got lots of other questions for you. Is it possible that the planet is not there?
No, the planet has been identified by scientists that it has come back, and it's in our solar system. There's a very authoritative book by a guy who has had access to all the big telescopes in Chile, Australia, that says that planet is now inside our big gas giants, the four outer planets of our solar system. When it comes, it will cause tsunamis, earthquakes, all kinds of plate tectonic movements. It will not be an easy time for all of us.
Oh boy,
and
doomgasm.
It is predicted to come next year.
And that's what we would call an Anunnaki-gasm right there. All right, Doctor.
That's an interesting word.
Anunnaki-gasm, yeah. It's kind of like a doom, kind of like a doomgasm. Only speaking of gasms, man, I was getting some background pictures for the show, and I've showed a number of them. But there are some that seem to be, you mentioned some of Zecharia Sitchin's book being racy, but I guess you would say some of the pictures I saw of the ancient Sumerians were racy and sexual in nature, and it seemed like they were well endowed men with they obviously didn't need Viagra or anything. But I'm just saying, there's a lot of pictures showing the ancient Sumerians themselves as giants. Is that
no? It was the Anunnaki that were giants. They were somewhere between 8 and 12 feet tall.
So they dwelt.
They were large.
All right, so they dwelt among the Sumerians.
They created the Sumerians.
Did they live with them?
They were still extant on Earth. They had not left Earth at the time that Mesopotamia was populated by the Sumerians, the Assyrians, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, and then eventually the Hebrews.
And you said that they wanted the gold from Earth.
They needed the gold in order to now. If you know anything about the construction of our own space vehicles, our rockets and the space vehicles that our astronauts live in, all the windows are coated with pulverized gold because that is a way of protecting the inhabitants of these vehicles from the ultraviolet rays of the sun. So this civilization we're talking about was way ahead of where we are.
Wouldn't there somewhere in excavations show some of this advanced technology? I mean, they found the cuneiform script. There's various impressions, wall diagrams, and 3D renditions of life in that culture. Where is the technology that they would have had? Well,
I suspect that most of it was taken back when they left this planet.
But they didn't get all the gold, though.
They left the evidence that they had stone cutting tools, because when you look at some of the enormous megastone structures, and Baalbek in Lebanon is a place where they used what they called trilithons as a base for what has been known historically and through this ancient material as a landing site. Sorry, I'm getting a little tickle in my throat here.
Oh, that's good.
Anyway, there is one place where there is one of these huge stone structures coming out of the earth. It was quarried, but they seem to have left it. So and there's sites in South America that show that the stones have been so properly cut that you can't even slide a razor blade in between them. So they did have. We see the evidence of their technology, but we don't have any of it.
Well, let me ask you something. Is Fort Knox? It's generally viewed as a place where the United States stores its gold deposits, but is it in fact a trap to attract the Anunnaki to come down to try to steal it? And once they come down, they'll capture them and steal their technology.
First of all, you want to get your research tools out and look back into monetary history of the last century. There is no more gold in Fort Knox.
Yeah, but the Anunnaki don't know that.
No, they don't know that, but they obviously had the ability before they ever came here to know that there was gold here. Now, how that happened, I have done a lot of research into some of the ancient materials, and they did know that there was gold on this planet. The first place they found it was at the floor of the Persian Gulf. Then they realized that it was mixed with other minerals, and there wasn't enough. So they didn't stay in that area for a long, long time. They moved to East Africa, where there was very large amounts of gold. They had mines that went a mile deep in the earth, which is one reason why the Anunnaki, who the second and third waves of Anunnaki, They probably, by the way, never had more than about 600 Anunnaki here.
Well, let me ask you, Dr. Evans. People say that they hear drilling or drone noises under the earth. Is that the Anunnaki down there drilling for our gold? Still drilling to this day?
Well, I suspect those are plate movements, and what they are hearing are the grinding of the tectonic plates that form the base of all the continents.
Okay. All right. We have another question for you.
That's just, I really, I know the kinds of material that you're coming from that prompt that question, but for example, there's a hollow earth theory that's had some books written about it. That's beyond my knowledge, and I've never been to the North Pole to see if you can walk inside the Earth.
All right, all right. Let's go to another question here.
I know where you're coming from, but that goes beyond my expertise.
Well, yeah, some people claim that it's the reptilians making tunnels, but as the Anunnaki, are they trying to rule over the humans today?
I don't know. There are
Would
people that feel
them?
that there are organizations, the Bilderbergers, there's 2 or 3 organizations that have been in existence and come through history that are supposed to be the financial wizards of the globe and that have their tentacles into all kinds of financial things. They're behind all the big banks in Europe and America and stuff like that. I know of that stuff, but I have no knowledge other than what gets in the news and some of the things that I've read. If you know the work of Jim Marrs, he's looked into that.
Jim Marrs?
Jim Marrs, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, I think we've had him on the show, actually. Let me ask you.
Yeah, and you should do that because he's also written several books. I know the man personally, and he's a journalist and an investigative reporter, and he has asked those kinds of questions that you're asking, and has done his homework. So he's a good person to
again back to my research before the show. As I was researching ancient Sumerian, some of the reliefs, the cuneiforms, the 3D, the carvings, a lot of them show of course, it doesn't really explain it, but it's either the Sumerians or the Earthlings seem to be having sex with animals. Was that part of their lifestyle?
No. I have a chapter in my book about love and lovemaking because I found those words in many of the indexes of Sitchin's books. So I began to look into that and look at what Sitchin was talking about. The Nephilim, the leadership, were very much involved in sexual relationships. Not when there was a group of Anunnaki who were in spaceships and who circled the Earth and did a lot of telemetry to gather information. They're the ones
and they got real horny up there.
Found out. Well, they were put on very long tours of duty. I mean, hundreds of years of duty because their lifespans, by the way, were on Nibiru time.
So they were hard up, but they hadn't had none for a while.
They lived hundreds of years, whereas our years are counted by the revolutions of our planet around the sun.
Right.
Their years were counted, they're called SARS, and they were counted by their revolutions around our sun, but it took 3,600 years to get... So, I mean, it almost boggles our mind. In some of Sitchin's books, he lists the length of time that certain kings
come
were
to Earth and
in
get some?
power in the Anunnaki civilization. And they're in hundreds. They're not in 20 or 30 or 100 years. They're in hundreds of years.
So there was no female type people up on those ships so they could take care of business.
No, those were called the Agigi, and they essentially had their tours of duty, and eventually they asked the leadership if they could come to Earth because not only were they needing some respite, but they also were deprived of any female contact. When they came to Earth, and some people have called them, some writers have called them, the fallen angels. There are several names for the Anunnaki. One name that was quite prominent was Anunnaki, and that was written by a gentleman, a British gentleman. His name slips right off my head. He's written 3 or 4 books. He's passed on now. He and his wife, Barbara, and oh boy, the book is on the other side of the room. Otherwise, I'd go get it. But anyway, Anunnaki. There are some people who have asked questions as they research where did the word Anunnaki come from, because it is not in the Bible. It comes from the Sumerian tablets.
Back to the animals, though. We were getting to the animals. What are they doing with them?
I suspect, and I don't know the history of the genetic research that was done way back 130,000 or 30,000 years ago, when Enki and his sister Ninturtag were doing their genetic research in their laboratory, which was in East Africa. I know that they tried several combinations. Sitchin does talk a little bit about this in some of his books. They tried all kinds of combinations. You know, the scimitar or the minotaur, that's part of Greek, was a man with the body of a horse. That may have some validity in terms of what the original genetic trial and errors were. They didn't just, go in the lab and 6 months from now have a blended being. They did establish birth mothers. There were 8 of them who birthed females and 8 who birthed males. And they raised children born on this earth who were essentially early humans. Now, when you start talking about civilization that precedes all the history that we've ever read or that has been codified in books and on the tablets, you get back into, the murky times. This is before agriculture. This is when they were hunting, gathering in earthlings. But when you get back into the time of the genetic work that was done, all we have to go on is what was dictated to the Sumerians and got put on clay tablets. If there was any other form, paper hadn't been invented. They wrote on any object, whether it was stone or clay or whatever. The history of language has all of that information about what's been found, but it's all historical information. It doesn't go much further back than 12 or 14,000 years. There is a site in Turkey that I've visited, and by the way, I go to Turkey about half of every year, and I've done that for the 5th year, and I leave on December 30th to go back for my 6th year of visiting ancient sites in Turkey. And there is a site called Göbekli Tepe. It's in the eastern part. It's near the ancient city of Haran. And it was uncovered by a Kurdish shepherd who owned the land. And his sons found this stone sticking up out of the side of the hill. And the father said, get that out of there because I need to clear this land. And that stone sticking up a foot or so, it was pointed. Turns out that they uncovered these carved stones that were in circles. It's a fascinating place. I've got photographs of my visit there, and I want to go back again this year if there isn't too much war going on in that area. But anyway.
Well, Dr. Evans, we're right at the top of our break here. We take a 5-minute break. So I want you to tell the folks a little bit about your book, The Legacy of Zecharia Sitchin, or the other one about the extraterrestrial origins, either one.
Yeah, the extraterrestrial origins is where I go into a lot of these issues that you're talking about. we don't have time. I would urge people to read that book. The Legacy book was published in 2012, and what I was trying to do there was to talk about the paradigm that Sitchin's work has created a different explanation of everything, and it runs contrary to everything that's been published. And he did not believe that this information was the mythology of the ancient peoples. Mm-hmm. He believed it was history.
Okay.
Anyway.
Okay. All right.
But those two books really cover a lot of ground.
Okay. All righty. We're going to take a 5-minute break here. Just stay on the line, and we're going to turn you down on our mic here, and we'll be back with you in 5 minutes.
All right. Very good.
All right. Hang on. All right, everybody. You're watching and or listening to the Edge television broadcast. Tonight we have with us Dr. M.J. Evans, Ph.D. We're talking about the Anunnaki, the extraterrestrial origins of humanity. If you have a question for the good doctor, you can click on the Fast Blast link on the front of the website of The Edge, or you can join him in a live chat and put your questions in there. We're going to take about with us Dr. M.J. Evans. Doctor, welcome back.
Hi there. I'm here.
All right, welcome back. So basically the theorem is that there is extraterrestrial origin of the human species, but does Sitchin say that we were created from scratch, or were we combined with animals, or were we part of the God, so to speak, a small g out in space, and kind of worked us together and set us down on this planet to work it out?
We were created on this earth in a laboratory where the first Anunnaki to come down, he was sent by his father, the king, on the planet, and he established the first settlements on Earth. He happened to be a very, very advanced scientist. He and his sister worked in this laboratory, and they did get genetic engineering, which sounds kind of fantastic when you first encounter the discussions of these of the origins of people. And I do devote a chapter to the whole issue of origins as Sitchin found it and wrote about it. They did the work just like our scientists are now doing genetic engineering. There's one Sumerian tablet. They not only wrote on them in the cuneiform language, but they also etched on a hard piece of stone or marble on a cylinder that was about as big as your fat thumb. And they created pictures that they etched all the way around this little piece of marble. And they then would roll it out on a piece of wet clay and create what has been called pictograms. One of the pictograms is very interesting. It shows two beings. One on the left side is obviously a male, and behind him is a rack of 3 or 4 test tubes. On the other side is a woman sitting on a bench, and she's holding up a being, a small child. And the text that went with this pictogram says, "Look what my hands have wrought." In other words, she and her brother had been working and working and working with various combinations of what eventually they found to be a hominid that was walking around on this earth, and they used that hominid as the other half, if you will, of the genetic mixture. Now, before that, they must have, and there's not a lot of information about this, Sitchin mentions it but doesn't go into a lot of detail, they must have tried other forms of living things, and that is what prompts you to use the word animals.
Well, let me ask you something. You say Sitchin was a...
But those experiments, by the way, never succeeded.
Didn't you say earlier in the first hour that Sitchin, being Jewish, I guess maybe studied the works of the Torah, but where it says God formed man out of the dust of the earth, in that case, was God lying?
No. By the way, the word God is something that I delve into in a couple of places. I think because these beings were larger in stature than the humans proved to be, and I think the fact that they were technologically advanced, the Sumerians called them, they had a reverence for them. But one of the things that I say very clearly is that I don't think they were worshipped in the way that we think. And the word God in most of Sitchin's work is little g. The word with the capital G, I think that, well, I know that Sitchin talks about this, but not in a lot of detail. There is a God of the universe. There is a God of the galaxy. There is a being that forms the basis of all Christian religion. Also, that's why we call it Judeo-Christian. It's part of Hebrew history, Jewish history. There are supreme beings that are part of Buddhism and some of the Eastern religions. If they use the word God, it's capital G. And it's who Moses found when he went up on the mountain and came down with the tablets. But he didn't see a being. He saw a burning bush that was the representation of God, or the manifestation of the supreme God of the universe. Now, the word God with a little g, capital, not the capital G, is what permeates the Sumerian material. And I believe, and I say this, that in my judgment, that it was their intelligence and their stature that prompted the Sumerians, who were their workers. They were not slaves, and there's 2 or 3 authors that have made big claims that they were created as slaves. They were workers. They were intelligent workers. They were trained as scientists, record keepers, historians. They created banking systems. They created all kinds of things. And I think it's because the Anunnaki were technologically way advanced over the Earthlings that they were admired. I don't think they called for, wanted, or demanded the reverence that is implied by our understanding of the word God. We think of God as an all-powerful, all-seeing, all-knowing being, and there are some people who have written books and talk about his throne and the light that emanates from it, that his archangels are on his right and left hand. That's a different concept. That's a belief structure. I don't think it was the way the Anunnaki saw themselves. In fact, as I say, the Anunnaki were the workers. It was the Nefilim who were the chosen few. It's sort of like they were the elite.
Okay, well, okay, Doctor, who chose them? Who chose the Nephilim to be the chosen people?
There was another planet that had a king. His name was Anu. He had 2 sons. His firstborn son was born of a concubine, therefore was not under their rules and regulations about who was deserving of succession. So Enki was firstborn, but not the legitimate son that could receive the heritage.
Okay, well, I don't know about his family.
The second-born son was Enlil. And when Enlil came to Earth, the king came down
I don't
at
want
the
to know
time
about
of the
their
mutiny.
genealogy is not the question. Who chose the Nephilim to be the chosen people?
They were the sons of the high officials on Nibiru.
On Nibiru? All right.
On the planet Nibiru had its own civilization, and it had a kingly structure. It's sort of like Camelot. Nibiru was like Camelot.
Okay, Doctor. Somebody asked.
Chosen people.
Okay, somebody asked a question because you were talking about the the clay tablet the size of a fat thumb. That doesn't sound like advanced technology to me.
No, remember the Sumerians were the ones who developed all of these records. Mm-hmm. It's not the clay tablets that were the size of the thumb. It was the etching on a piece of marble or hard stone that was rolled out on clay and created a picture. Mm-hmm. The tablets themselves can be held in the hand. Are you still there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Something changed in the in what I heard. That's why I had to ask. Okay. I wasn't sure that the connection had still stayed intact. Anyway, the clay tablets were essentially like books, only written in clay and baked or hardened in the sun.
Mm-hmm. Now, what? Okay, so why did they leave?
Why did they leave Earth?
Yes.
Well, that's a good question. There is some information that says that the Nazca lines in South America are the tracks of the major groups of Nephilim who took off in their spaceships. Sitchin does talk about that in one of his books. I think they left because the Earthlings had procreated and were beginning to develop agriculture, trade, were becoming prolific. In fact, Enlil...
There's a lot of us down here, isn't there?
Pardon?
There's a lot of humans down here, isn't there?
Well, there sure is. We have overpopulated the Earth beyond the carrying capacity of the Earth to provide food. And we have lots of examples of annihilation from natural causes, like the tsunami that...
Are they going to help us with global warming?
Well, I think the answer is, will we allow them to help? Uh-huh. When they come back, and we know that there are UFOs that are in our atmosphere, probably the beings that we found, the gray ones with the big eyes and the long spindly necks, they are probably robots or advanced robots. But there are, on the spaceships, reports that there are tall beings. Some of them are blonde, some of them are redheaded. We don't know that much about the other species that are out there in the universe. There are some sources that say there are 15 or 18 species that are now surveilling Earth. There are other people who say there are hybrids, that all of the people that have been abducted and have had their women have been implanted with beings that
you mean impregnated?
That are hybrids.
They were impregnated?
Yes.
Oh boy.
There we go. That whole business of abduction and whatever the agenda are of these beings from other planets in the larger universe, we don't know that much about. But there are people writing about these things. There are people who claim that they have enough information to write books about them.
Are they still impregnating today? Well,
I don't know. I can't answer that question. I'm not in the realms of that. I used to go to a conference until I started going to Turkey and doing my own research. I used to go to a conference that was held first in Nevada and now has moved to Arizona. It's the International UFO Congress. It's usually held in February. And there are people who are writing books and getting invited to give presentations at that conference. And there's an enormous range of research going on. And you got to be either a millionaire or have a very good reader like a...
See, that's not fair, is it? All right, here we got another question for you. Are the ley lines the tracks for the Anunnaki also?
Well, ley lines are a different subject. There are some British scholars who have found on, for example, the islands of Great Britain, lines of energy. Now, whether they emanate from magnetic sources within the tectonic plates that form the land masses, I think that's probably the likeliest explanation.
Mm-hmm.
But there've been a couple of scholars who have found that there are churches, there are wells, there are energy sources that they can follow in straight lines.
Mm-hmm.
I've read about those things. When I've been to Britain, I've never followed the ley line. I don't know. That again is on the margins of my knowledge.
All right, let's go to another question. This is from Philip in Georgia. What are they going to do when they come back to Earth?
Well, I deal with that in possibilities. In my first book, The Legacy of Zecharia Sitchin. First of all, the great flood of Noah was set in motion by the fact that the ice sheet on Antarctica got destabilized when the planet was coming back. And it finally slipped, the enormous ice sheet that covers Antarctica slipped into the Indian Ocean, created a flood that we now call, in historical language, Noah's flood or the Great Flood.
Was Noah Anunnaki too?
No, Noah was a human. He was a priest in early Judaism.
Okay, good.
And he had contact with Enki. He lived at the time of Enki and Enlil, but Adam and Eve also knew the Anunnaki. They were Enki's symbol was entwined stakes, that the caduceus that the medical profession now wears on their lapels. Enki lived in an area when he first came to Earth at the end of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers that was very swampy. And in fact, he called his house a snake house, which is understandable. He was probably the being, the Anunnaki, the Nefilim, who was talking with Eve in the Garden of Eden. I talk about that a little bit in my book.
Okay, so that wasn't the devil; that was an Anunnaki in there.
It wasn't a snake as it is being portrayed in most Christianity. It was a being who was symbolized by entwined snakes because that's what he had to deal with when he built the
really even
first
say
settlements
snakes.
on Earth.
It says serpent. So some kind of serpent being, which most people.
No. He was there. There are pictures in on these pictograms that I'm talking about. Enki was.
He was a reptilian.
No, he was. I don't think so. I think the reptilians are another race from another part of the solar system.
Yeah, I don't like them too well either.
The galaxy.
Yeah.
And there are people, I've seen people give talks and they've shown pictures and drawings and diagrams of reptilians. Maybe there is another race of people somewhere out there in deep space that is reptilian. I don't know. I've been on the margins, as it sounds like you have too, of these ideas, but
I'm on the margins, all right.
We can't prove it. We can't prove it. There are some speakers that I've heard at the International UFO Congress who have indicated that they have seen them. I don't know where they are, and I don't think I want to know.
No, we really don't. But back to the original question, what are they going to do when they get back here? They going to go after the women again?
Well, first of all, Enlil knew about this flood coming, this huge tsunami that was going to inundate the entire Mesopotamian area.
Is there an answer coming here?
And he was disturbed by the
Well, I'm getting
enormous
disturbed.
proliferation of humans who were, and the firstborn hybrids, essentially, of humans and Anunnaki were giants. And we know in the Bible there were giants. Well, Enlil decided that they were out of control. There had been a famine, and they were eating each other. They were involved in cannibalism. They had eaten all the food supplies.
Sick.
And Enlil proclaims that he's going to let the flood, and he took the council of the Nephilim, and he had a meeting with them, and he said, there is a flood coming, and we will go in our spaceships, and we are not going to tell humans. We're going to let them all die. And Noah learned about it because Enlil's brother had been the chief scientist and who had created the humans. He was a member of that council. He was enjoined by his
Dr.
brother.
Evans, I don't know what rabbit hole we just went.
Humans.
Well, wait a minute now. Just a simple question. What are they going to do when they come back?
Well, I think they're going to be very upset with the overpopulation and the exhaustion of the food supply.
They're going to exterminate us like they did in War of the Worlds?
Well, yeah, that's another exaggeration of some of these ancient ideas. But
they don't like the overpopulation.
Is going to go through convulsions that you and I have never seen, never heard of, and may not survive when that planet comes back.
I know you're not a scientist, but you're a doctor. Hey, question
whether they come to the ruins, the flooded ruins of the planet, I don't know.
Okay,
maybe the population will all be trimmed down.
Doctor, do you believe that the planet is overpopulated?
Absolutely.
Okay, would you like to go ahead and check out and help depopulate? Do you want to sign up for that yourself?
Well, if I survive, I live in the mountain. I live on a mountain. I live above what they have been predicting to be the levels of land below 1,000.
So the overpopulation. The overpopulation is for people who live down the mountain, not people like you who live up the mountain.
Well, the overpopulation is all over the planet.
But you won't volunteer. You won't volunteer yourself.
Asia, Africa, United States, South America, the entire world is overpopulated.
Okay, but you won't volunteer yourself to start the depopulation.
Can I tell you a little secret?
What? Yeah.
I'm 83 going on 84. I don't think I'm going to survive if it floods. Uh-huh. And I won't survive much more than the next 20 years if I'm lucky. Anyway. So
one way or another, you're going to help depopulate.
I would volunteer as I age out. I will volunteer to leave the planet.
All righty. Well,
but by natural causes.
Uh-huh. Okay. Well, by the way, when you depopulate, unquote, where are you going to go after you leave this? Your life is ended. Where are you going to go?
Well, I believe that the spirit and the soul are immortal, and that we will shed this earthly body. That has proved to be every human being has a reason for passing on.
Okay.
And there are different views among the different religious sects that populate Christianity.
Mm.
I don't know that much about Judaism, but
did you ever go to
Buddhism,
church?
Pardon?
Did you ever go to church?
Oh, I go to church regularly. Yes.
Oh, really? And you hold on to these views. Is it something that you keep to yourself so you don't cause a riot within the church?
Yeah, I don't talk about my personal beliefs. I participate in the singing and listen carefully.
Mm-hmm. Does the singing make you feel good?
A Baptist, an Episcopalian, a spiritualist. I have sampled lots of religious beliefs in the course of my life, and there's a kernel of truth in all of them. Mm-hmm. I do think that the human soul is immortal. I've read things about the other side of the veil. my initial interest in the Irish myths had to do with the fact that they believed in the idea of the other world, the happy other world, which was on the other side of the veil. There's a lot of ideas out there. The history of religion is a fascinating field. I wish I had more time in my study process to learn more about it. I don't know the answers. Mm-hmm. I don't know the answers about what's on the other side of the veil. I've read information about past lives, the people who've had near-death experiences. I know some of that literature. Mm-hmm. It's fascinating. I don't think we will know where we go after we shed our earthly mm-hmm. body. I don't mm-hmm. think we will know until we go there. Mm. I think that's the great unknown.
When you go to church and sing songs, does that make you feel good?
Yes, because I grew up with that. I was raised a Baptist. Okay. And then an Episcopalian, and I was in the choir. I know those things from my childhood.
But if you feel like some of the Bible was sort of plagiarized by previous cultures, wouldn't it make you feel better if you sang songs that the Anunnaki and Nephilim wrote?
Well, if they wrote, and in the University of Pennsylvania Museum that Zecharia took us to, there was one of the first instruments. It was like a lyre. It was I can't even remember.
They actually did write a song. I have it right here.
Yeah, they wrote a lot of poetry. I mean,
here's a song.
lot of the information that comes on the tablets is in the form of poetry, and I quote several of those in my book. Mm-hmm. Where they're appropriate to the topics that I'm discussing.
Since you believe in that so thoroughly, let's see if you feel sort of elevated with this song here they wrote. I've got it right here. I'm going to sing it to you. Ready?
Okay.
Amazing Anunnaki, how sweet the sound that the Nephilim came down to kill. How's that sound? Does that make you feel good? Does that touch your soul?
No, it touches my funny bone.
I bet you weren't ready for that one. So, okay, well, I mean,
Daniel, you're a very creative fellow. I admire you.
All right, well, I just did that one on the fly right there. Okay, so, all right. A question came down from our live chat for you. It came down. If the Anunnaki made us, where did our soul come from? Did they insert one in there with the body?
According to some of Zechariah's discussion of those genetic experiments, they put something called TM, and their syllabic language was like TE.EM.MA. I can't remember the exact Sumerian spelling, but they didn't just do one set of genetic discussions. They put Tiema was supposed to be personality, and it was supposed to bond. And by the way, they didn't use dirt. It wasn't dirt. It was probably that was the translator's name for the scientific material that carried the DNA. I mean, there's a lot of things that our recent research has shown us, and the words that are in the Bible, the words that are used, are the best that the translators could do with their knowledge when they read these tablets and tried to figure out what they were talking about. This is one of the things that Zecharia is noted for, is that he figured out that they were using, that the translators had used information to the best of their knowledge. There was no airplanes hadn't been invented. There was no notion of other planets or travel off this earth when most of these original translations were put on paper.
Now, a guy named Giorgio Tertullio seems to believe that there were airplanes and submarines back then.
Well, I have a chapter on the wonderful flying machines that were used, yes, but in our culture, when these translations were going on, there was no space age. There was no flying. People didn't leave the planet. Now we know that our technological development has given us things that also were part of this ancient civilization. One of the Nephilim was, her name was Inanna, Ishtar. And she used to fly around in the equivalent of, as best I can tell from reading the original sources, she used to fly around in an individual machine. They show pictograms of her with this stuff strapped onto her, like these guys that are trying to get individual flying capability. Mm-hmm. Not in an airplane, but just with their own propellant and their own spacesuit, and just, you've seen pictures of this, I'm sure. There have been some movies that where some of these adventurous military types have flown. Well, she used to do this according to the evidence, and we know that they had flying machines because we've seen their pictograms. We've seen the.
But you're saying the reason we can't find them is because they took everything with them.
Well, yes, but there are also like little toys that got sculpted out and put in museums that were found. They looked like little toys.
No, I've seen them.
And they had wings and a fuselage. And
that's what Giorgio Tertullio wears on his jacket as a little pin. So
right. Yeah.
Okay, here's a question. What day or month do you think Planet X will be arriving?
October.
October of this year?
Next year, 17.
Oh, man, it's always a year out. How come we can't get something happen like in a couple of days?
Well, we've got all kinds of, according to some scientists, we've got all kinds of information that's telling us that not only is the global temperature changing, not only are the ice caps melting, sea level rising, that there are more volcanic explosions than that in the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years than there have been in all of history. That things are going on. You ever look up in the sky and see an airplane that leaves a trail in the atmosphere? And when you look up, like I did this morning and saw, or yesterday morning actually, saw 3 airplanes laying down these trails.
Yeah.
Airplanes lay contrails.
Yeah, they're chemtrails, right?
These other airplanes lay chemtrails. Now, one explanation is that they are trying to mitigate the effects of the coming planet, of Nibiru coming back. Another explanation is that they're trying to get rid of all the vulnerable population, like the elderly and the infirmed, and do that by contaminating our atmosphere.
Well, darling, that's going to mean you. Are they trying to get? I said, darling, that's going to mean you. You're high on the mountain. You're going to be the first one affected.
Yeah, but I look out in my atmosphere, and here are these chemtrails, and I know they're chemtrails because they don't dissipate. They don't dissipate within 5 minutes after the airplane goes by.
Right.
I see a lot of airplanes that are flying around, and those contrails dissipate within a mile after the airplane passes.
Right.
The contrails the chemtrails stay there, and essentially, if 2 of them have been laid down and they merge, they spread out, and then they descend very slowly within the atmosphere.
How do we know the Anunnaki's not up there making the chemtrails?
Because they are airplanes that have no commercial markings on them, that fly out of defunct air bases, that are part of, according to some very, very knowledgeable sources that are part of a black budget.
Doctor.
Now, whether they are trying to control the population, I was told that most of the respiratory problems have increased tremendously, and I learned that at the conference. I came home and I talked to my own physician, and I said, have you seen respiratory problems? He said, yeah, I deal with it all the time. I said, how does what you're dealing with now in current time compare with, let's say, 10 years ago? He said it's increased by 3 or 4 times. And he said most of the people are vulnerable and elderly. So whether these chemtrails have some atmospheric effect to mitigate against these dust storms that are coming as a result of the return of Nibiru, or whether they are a black ops program that the military is carrying out in order to thin out the population, I don't know.
Okay.
No way to know.
So do you think that abortion is a helpful thing then? That's like human race kind of depopulating itself?
Well, I think there are natural causes. There are disease causes. There was one guy in the 1800s.
You have a way of not answering. Wait a minute. You have a way of not answering the question here. Is abortion a good thing then because it contributes to the depopulation of the world?
Well, I think that the more diseases that we have, and we've got some that have come up in the last
not a disease.
20, 30, 40 years that are very, very virulent and have taken out hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of people from the population. One of them is called AIDS. Some of these other things that have come out of Africa.
Funny, I don't know how we got AIDS out of an abortion question. No, something's weird here.
That's a human problem, and that's another problem that has to do with our development in medical science. And yes, it's got a moral dimension to it, but that's something that's within our culture, within a world culture, because abortion is not just an American problem.
Mm-hmm. Well, I did say depopulate
and there are
the world.
people who have said that the soul comes at the point of conception, and therefore, if you take a fetus by some mechanical intervention, that you are tampering with the soul. Mm-hmm. There are other people who believe the soul enters at the point of birth when the child starts breathing human, ambient air. Who knows what this is? I'm not God, and I don't have a direct connection to God who talks to me and tells me what the truth is.
Really? That's great. What was the last thing that God said to you?
He doesn't talk to me.
Oh.
I have had some I will admit to you, I've had some very strange things that have happened to me throughout my life where I should have died, and I believe that there were angel interventions. But even that's just my musings as I look back on my life.
If an Anunnaki and an angel got into a war, who would win?
Well, I think the angel would.
Sound like they got more
power. Because the Anunnaki are a species of being.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
There is one place where Zecharia says that he doesn't know why humans are on the earth when they have, and he doesn't think that humans grew on this earth other than the way the Anunnaki are explaining it to us.
Doctor,
we have more, we are made up of minerals and all kinds of substances that are more common in other parts of the universe than they are on Earth.
Let's talk about the mechanics of Planet X coming by. What speed is that planet going, you think?
Oh, I don't know. I don't.
Tens of thousands of miles per hour?
I don't think it's been measured. The cosmologist would have to answer that.
All right,
question.
well, let's just say fast. Okay, let's just say 25,000 miles an hour. Okay, now help me understand. This planet's come flying into our universe. Okay, now are the Anunnaki going to jump off the planet and try to jump onto the Earth, or are they going to launched from spaceships.
They're going to come down in space. They're going to come down in their spaceships that they have manufactured.
But the planet is the Planet X. It's going to continue flying off into space, so they're going to be stuck here for another 34,000 years.
Zecharia has some interesting diagrams where he shows the orbits, the elliptical orbit, and the position of the planet. And he believes that as the planet is incoming, there are places along that incoming leg of their orbit where they have more activity. When they leave, when they've transited the sun and they're on their way back out into space, there are places on that leg of the orbit where they can easily reach Earth. Mm-hmm. I saw a tablet in the British Museum that was circular, and it had like pie-shaped segments, and there are some cuneiform letters and words along one of those pie-shaped lines. And what it says is, go, 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 turn left at Mars. So they had navigation devices, and supposedly that particular artifact was used by Enlil on one of his trips back to Earth after he'd gone back to visit his father or do something on Nibiru. On Nibiru. I don't know I don't know, number one, if they have still reverence for this planet. They could have become so disillusioned, and by the way, the UFO sightings increased when we developed nuclear weapons.
Well, if the world's
they are sighted over all of the nuclear reactors, UFOs, all over the world.
Doctor, I heard a stat one time that said that the entire population of the Earth could fit in the city of New York if people standing side by side and there were no buildings. So how is it that the world's overpopulated?
Well, have you looked at the birth rates of most of the countries of the world?
That's not the answer to the question.
Well, that's how we produced more human beings.
Okay. Well, I didn't ask how we produce more human beings. Imagine a man gets with a woman or somebody's doing something weird in a laboratory. But I'm saying, how is the world overpopulated when the entire population could fit into the city of New York if they stood side by side?
How are you going to feed them? Where are you going to get clean water? How are you going to feed them? And how are you going to deal with disease?
I'm not asking them how to feed them or wipe their ass. I'm saying, how is it that they're all in the city, standing side by side? How does that make the world overpopulated? Because you disperse them in the entire population of the Earth out, then how is it that the world is overpopulated? Who made that decision that it is what the number of sustainable humans is?
Well, there are population scientists, and when I was in graduate school, I did take a course in population analysis, and then when I was instructing in the university setting, I taught a course in population. Okay. And essentially, the fact that we have birth rates that are calculated for every single country in the world, and there are places in the world where the birth rate is extremely high.
Okay.
And most of those babies live. We have a measure of what happens to infants. It's called infant mortality, and that's the calculation of the number of deaths that occur before 1 year of age. Male babies, there are far more male babies born, and I've lost the exact details and scientific numbers, but there are more male babies born, but male babies are frailer than female babies. That is something that's been known in medical science for years. So essentially, they measure the number of deaths that occur over live births, and those rates in certain parts of the world where starvation and disease are rampant, and many of those places are in Africa, although they are everywhere. All the history of medical science shows that we have had famines, and we have had, like the plague, which took over half of the population in history.
So, can't we believe that God created a planet that can sustain as many humans as on this planet? Have you ever been out west?
Well, we'd like to believe that, but based on my academic work in population, that doesn't seem to be the case. We have war, we have famine, we have
okay, those are both depopulation things.
Those we have what Malthus called checks and balances on the size of the population. There's natural disasters, natural causes, and there are human and disease vector causes. We know that the history of medical science tells us that there are reasons why we get polluted water, we get polluted.
Well, let me ask you something. Which group of people do you think God would rather not have on this planet?
Oh, you're asking me to fathom the mind of God. I don't think God makes those decisions.
Then maybe God doesn't consider. Maybe God is not considering that the planet is overpopulated, because if He did, then wouldn't He, by that logic, say, okay, well, I'm going to eliminate these many people over here. I'm going to kill these many people over there. I mean, if He believed that the world's overpopulated, wouldn't he jump in and take care of business?
I don't think so. I think He's leaving.
Maybe He loves every single person that's born, Doctor. Maybe He loves every single person.
I'm sure He does.
Then He wouldn't consider them.
In most churches,
okay,
they teach you that God loves all, and that's what the Bible teaches. God loves everyone who's been born.
Yeah. Did you
God
ever
will
see
take care of you throughout your life?
Did you ever see a Christmas
people
Carol?
Die every day.
Did you ever see a Christmas Carol about Ebenezer Scrooge?
Yes, sure have.
Remember when he said maybe we need to reduce the extra population?
Yeah.
Okay, and now obviously he said that he was going to go into some kind of purgatory hell for the rest of his life with chains, and he said that the population needed to be decreased. But I think he reversed that after he found the spirit of Christmas. So maybe the spirit of Christmas says that every person on this planet is of value, and there is no such thing as overpopulation.
Well, overpopulation refers to the ability of the human race to sustain itself from disease, from famine, and to provide food and clean water. Those are the environmental components that are infecting people and causing death.
So you agree with Scrooge that the decrease the surplus population is an admirable thing to do?
I would prefer that we go back to Zecharia Sitchin in my book.
Okay.
So that I think we're dealing with information that goes beyond my expertise.
Well, speaking of that, I've got your book Okay, Doctor. Speaking of that, I've got your book in my background. Why don't you tell the folks a little bit what's in there?
Well, I deal with 7 issues. One I start out with, and I explain the Anunnaki family tree and some of their rules that became known to us through the Sumerian tablets. And then I go into the creation of Earthlings, and I'm drawing on Zechariah's work because he's the one who has read the tablets and has studied all of the other sources. Then I have a chapter that deals with Anunnaki love and lovemaking, because what I discovered is that it permeated the Nephilim society. Whether it permeated through to all of the Anunnaki or not, I am not sure. But I do deal with the information that Zecharia pulled out.
Wait a minute. Maybe the Anunnaki ain't so bad.
Pardon?
Maybe the Anunnaki ain't so bad. They're all about lovemaking.
Well, and we are made with their genes. So a couple of places I go out on a limb and I talk about the fact that the proclivities of the Anunnaki are the proclivities of the human race. Oh. Then I go into a chapter on wonderful flying machines because of the disbelief by governments, particularly America, about the whole business of UFOs. Then I get into I got interested and concerned about the concept of war that was permeating all of the earth. Mm-hmm. And so I began to look into the history of war, and the bottom line is that the Anunnaki taught humans how to wage war. And there are two wars that are talked about in the history materials. One is and they are wars between the two suns and their progeny. So Enki and Enlil had reasons, and I explained those reasons why they were jealous of each other. When they started having their own progeny and then recruiting other Anunnaki, they then recruited Earthlings. There was an iron factory at where the Aswan Dam is now, at that cataract on the Nile River, and they crafted weapons there, and they taught Earthlings to use them and to fight with them. And there are two wars, the First Pyramid War and the Second Pyramid War. They were wars that took place in Africa, in the area of the Nile River. And so I go into the concept of war and warring and devote a chapter to what I can find about that. And then the last chapter in my book is called Armageddon, Global Catastrophe, ? And there is information that Zecharia found and brought out in his books that deal with a prediction of what's going to happen to Earth. And some of it will be natural disasters, and others of it will be wars. And certainly, if you look around the globe now, humans are killing humans by the handful. Within Islam, there are two sects. They are Muslim, and yet they're fighting and killing each other.
Go figure.
Within all of the countries, there are now groups of people. We call them terrorists, whether they're ISIS or whether they're some other name.
Now there's a population that could be decreased right there.
Well, and they've done it, and they have reinvented and brought forward the whole notion of crucifixion, beheading,
Stone Age freaks, man.
All kinds of mutilation in the name of the religious beliefs that they have, whether they're African groups or whether they're Syrian or
well, they believe the Muslims
whatever.
believe in Anunnaki anyway, though. So.
The Muslims
they believe they are the
came
Anunnaki.
Came out of early Hebrews. There were
they came out of a bowl of crap.
Well, again, if we get too far into the political machinations of the world and the religious world, there are some people now saying that religion is the bane of the human race. That its differences among that have split the arguments down into the finest grains that are causing the tribulations. Christianity has how many different sects, of which Catholicism and fundamental belief are the most prominent. I mean, I live in the mountains of North Carolina. You can't go 5 miles on any one of these roads in this eastern part or western part of the state that you don't see churches one after the other.
And every single
different denominations.
Exactly.
I mean,
and every one of them is trying to help feed the poor, clothe the naked, and heal the sick.
Yeah.
How come
I have an
the
epilogue
mosques don't
to
do
the book
that?
that's called "The Past Informs the Future," and I take Zechariah's belief that if we know what history has to tell us and teach us, we might be able to do something. I don't think the human race is going to take care of itself. It's going to take some kind of an intervention, whether it's other species from other parts of the universe, or whether it's the concept of an all-knowing, all-seeing, all-powerful God.
When's the last time you saw a soup kitchen run by Muslims?
Saw a suitcase?
Soup kitchens. When's the last time you saw a soup kitchen?
Oh, soup kitchen.
Yeah. How about never?
No, there are not soup kitchens as we understand it, but they do take care of each other.
Yeah, their self, right? They don't take care of anybody but their self.
I live in Turkey half the year. I have seen examples of benevolence by Turks to other Turks.
Mm-hmm. What about Turks to Christians?
The country of Turkey has taken in 3 million Syrians from the wars.
And they got paid to do so.
No, they didn't get paid, and Europe is not helping them with that burden.
Well, they need to take all of them.
Big issues.
How many should they take? All of them. Hey, Doctor, listen, we're at the end of the broadcast. I really appreciate you.
Oh, my goodness. Well, we had 2 hours, and it's all gone.
Man, I'm telling you, it was so much fun. How'd you like being on the program?
Yes. Well, I would urge people to read the Zecharia Sitchin and the Extraterrestrial Origins of Humanity if they've been interested in any of the topics that we've talked about, because we've digressed and gone into implications, but at least you could get a flavor of the material that Zecharia worked with and what his courage and his talent and belief system gave him in the way of knowledge about the great gods of ancient times.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm just going to...
And again, I use the word gods. Really, they are the great beings of ancient times. I don't think they were gods as we understand that word, even if it is written with a little g instead of a capital.
Well, I'm just going to stick with the one true living God myself. Dr. Evans, I appreciate you coming on the Edge television broadcast tonight.
Well, Daniel, I've enjoyed it, and your knowledge and your ideas are fascinating. I wish we had more time to talk about some of the other things that you raised that I've kind of skirted around and sidestepped because my knowledge doesn't go that far. It's not that I don't hold opinions, but that's not what I'm on this discussion talking with you about.
Yeah.
I'm interested in the evidence.
Yeah. All right. Well, you're a very nice lady, and I appreciate you coming on the show, Doctor.
Okay. Well, I've enjoyed it, and do hope maybe we can do this again.
Okay.
I'm going back to Turkey to study more ancient sites and write another book. So.
Well, you're just as young as you feel, and you're flying around the world. That's more than most of us are doing.
My family still thinks I'm half nuts.
That's the only way to be. That's how the show program works, because I'm nuts. So there you go.
Yeah, right. Well, Daniel, thank you very much for inviting me, and I've enjoyed our time together.
Okay. Good evening then.
Good evening now.
Bye-bye. All right, everybody. That was the dear Dr. M.J. Evans talking to us about the Anunnaki coming down here. And hey, she liked my little song, though. There you go. That's pretty good. All right. Hey, next week we're going to have Steve Olson. He has promised on December 24th just to blow this thing up. So if you're not doing nothing, log into the program next week. He says something happened to his YouTube channel. They wiped him out, and he said, look, man, I'm going to put something on the air that you're not even going to believe. So, all right, we'll see. We'll see that on December 24th. December 31st, Jake Rutowski is going to be on the program talking about the sharpening and the topic there to be revealed. January 7th, Sheila Zelinsky is going to be with us talking about the green Armageddon, getting ready to smack into the planet. Hopefully, the green Armageddon hits us before planet Nibiru comes down in here. I don't got much use for that kind of planet, man. Come up in our house here trying to steal our gold. Well, they ain't going to get our gold, okay? All right, we're going to take some of the gold, smack him Anunnaki right in the face. January 14th, Michael Bell is going to be with us, and he's going to be talking about, he's over on the East Coast chasing vampires. And guest 161, Colonel SC has disappeared. We've tried to get him on the program. All of our contacts have been disintegrated, probably hacked by the Russians. Who knows? Who knows where he is? Probably fighting them off. Remember, the colonel came on the program, said he was personally in charge of dropping 500,000 bombs on pedophiles down in South America. So he's got a lot of work going on. Okay, he don't got time to come back on the Edge Television program. All right, everybody, be sure to tell everybody in your contact list about the Edge Television broadcast. This show will begin to replay here in just a few minutes. Our main player will extract the high definition video, put it up on our YouTube channel, podcast it, and put it in our TuneIn radio program. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. Well, there you go. Blessings to all. Daniel Ott for the Edge. Bye-bye.